Sure. Well, certainly Senate Bill 360 helped considerably in that. There will be a need, for instance, the vote center model that we've talked about so much today. Early voting is authorized in California law. Interestingly, it's only authorized leading up to Election Day. There's nothing in the current law that would allow you to have vote centers on Election Day. So that's probably an easy fix, but that would require legislation. The ability to, as we implement regional voting centers that serve all voters in a county, to get past the current thresholds that require establishing individual precinct polling places throughout the county in election is another area where there should be some give and take. Again, I would recommend that happen gradually so that as voters migrate to the regional voting centers that we have a similar reduction in the number of polling places. But right now there are very specific formulas in state law about how many polling places, their proximity and all of that. And again, that's based on the one-to-one match. Certainly, I spoke a lot, and I heard from your side of the panel today the interest in more comprehensive voter outreach and education programs. If that is viewed by the California legislature as a fundamental responsibility of election administrators, that should be codified in law, and there should be resources to support that. The bureaucratic answer, and it was covered in my testimony, but I feel compelled to repeat it, is that right now the state is not covering the cost of those things that are already in election law. So the fact that in LA County over the last 4 fiscal years we've conducted over 20 special vacancy elections, and I've had to, working with the county budget office, come up with over $28 million to cover the costs of those vacancy elections, makes it harder for me to advocate with the county board of supervisors and the county budget office to funnel money into voter outreach and education. So we really need to tackle the issue of how elections are funded in California and make sure that that's sustainable over time as well.
And also this whole question of special elections. I mean, you mentioned the fact that up in the northern portion of the county, we've got one candidate on the ballot, and we're spending $1.4 million on that one election with one candidate on the ballot, when at the same time you've only got $250,000 total for your outreach activities.
That's correct, and I would love to share with you some of the tweets I'm receiving from voters in that area as they're receiving those voting materials, and I'm seeing that there's only one candidate on the ballot.
I mean, it's an absurdity, and I think it's something we ought to look at, when it comes to several things, both involving the special election rules and appointments and that kind of thing, but also, of course, looking at the resources question. So ultimately, if you're explaining, if a voter comes up to you and says, "What the heck's going on in LA County?" What's your quick answer? If maybe there isn't a quick answer, but how do you answer this question of why we were so far below the rest of the state in voter turnout in the last election, when we had the same issues, same propositions, same candidates as other counties?
I think, unfortunately, there is no one single silver bullet answer to that question. What I think we have all heard here today, though, is a fairly unified voice of what the symptoms of that situation are, and I think it's everything that we've talked about. I think it has to do with the frequency of the elections. It has to do with the high-profile contests and the polarization in our community, but it also has to do with the demographics of LA County. And I think, as you've heard today, there are a lot of people out there looking at that and trying to tackle that. I think we have to continue that dialogue and not be afraid to try new things. I think that one of the things I would say, and I mentioned this at the Future California Elections meeting earlier this week, one of the things that was very memorable to me in watching the film Selma was when they were in their room and deciding what are the elements that should go into this legislation that became the Federal Voting Rights Act. Somebody made the point that they shouldn't just be talking about 1965, they should be talking about 1985. And I would say that the same thing is true here. We're all focused on the concern for the low turnout in 2014 and a lot of excitement about where we should be in 2016. But we also need to be thinking about where we need to be in 2026 and 2030, and making sure that the the voting experience matches what the expectations voters are going to have in the future. And frankly, in the realm of elections administration, has traditionally been more reactive rather than proactive in that regard.
And I think you're hearing from members of this committee. And by the way, as I came down here, people in Sacramento were saying, you know, so excited that we're doing this hearing, and I think there is a sense of urgency amongst a lot of the leadership and elected officials in Sacramento as to how we need to take a role in helping you be more proactive and really engage this issue in a more in a less reactive way. Let's I want to dig a little deeper on the issue of Oregon and this question of the DMV database and voter file. Do you know much about how Oregon weeds out the ineligibles? I mean, obviously there's a, you know, so the other list that we have of a potentially eligible set of voters is a little different than the exact eligibility associated with voters. So talk to me about the logistics of that.
I don't have the specifics of that. I can definitely get that. I do know that that's an important point, that there are variances from state to state, for instance, on whether or not the DMV file has information about citizenship, for example, and we certainly would not want to put ineligible residents in a position of showing up on the voter rolls and put them at jeopardy in that. And I think that's an important thing. And certainly in Los Angeles County, that's a concern that we would have to look at very closely. I think there are ways around that. I think that we just have to surface that issue. Again, I'd like to get back to you with the specifics of Oregon. I know that they've done some of that analysis, and I know, again, the work that the Pew Center on the States has done on this electronic registration project has looked at those issues too, to make sure that that while we're gaining efficiencies and cleaning up the voter rolls and identifying those who aren't registered, who ought to be registered, that we're not at the same time sacrificing privacy or putting anybody in jeopardy in that process.
Okay. I'd love to talk to you more about that to better understand it, especially if we're going to move forward with something along these lines. Almost as a similar question to what I asked the previous speaker, if you were able to put that $1.4 million that we're spending on the Senate race up in North County into outreach instead, what does that go to right now? I mean, what outreach?
Short term, I would spend that money on a comprehensive outreach campaign for the 2016 election cycle for both the primary and the general. And
what does that look like?
It would look like high-profile media campaign where we would engage with the talent in our local media community. It would not be bureaucratic. It would not be me on PSAs. It would be the radio personality that you listen to on your commute in the morning, talking about the importance of voting and giving examples of why that's important. It would be the newscaster that you watch on the evening news talking about voting and counting down the deadlines and the specifics of the voting experience. It would be branded billboards that would lead you to websites that could tell you where your polling place is, what's on the ballot, how to get a vote by mail ballot, whether or not your vote by mail ballot has been received and counted. It would be a set of community workshops that empower voters to know their rights and responsibilities in the elections process and how they can best engage. That's the short term. In the long term, it would be to accelerate this project and this move towards a different model of a voting experience, and to break away from this one-to-one relationship of the voter to a single polling place, and to have a voting period that extends for at least 2 weeks leading up to the election, and also that allows voters to interact with the process after Election Day, to be able to easily track the outcome of the election for those contests and measures that were of highest interest to them. So when we're doing weekly updates, there was reference made by Secretary Padilla to the close race for state controller. It would be great for voters who were particularly interested in that race to have been getting regular updates on that count, so that they would recall that. Sadly, I think what happened in that race is by the time we finished certifying that results, I think most people didn't even remember who they voted for controller, because we sort of stopped engaging with voters after Election Day. And I think there's a whole host of opportunity available in that regard.